Leviticus 13. Za'aret, supernatural skin disease. Then Adonai spoke to Moses and to Aaron, saying, When a man has a swelling on the skin of his body, or a scab, or a bright spot, and it becomes the plague mark of Za'aret in his flesh, then she shall be brought to Aaron the Kohen, or to one of his sons, the Kohanim. The Kohen is to examine the plague of Za'aret on his skin, and if the hair on the plague has turned white, and the appearance of the plague is deeper than the body's skin, it is the plague of Za'aret. Thus the Kohen shall examine him and pronounce him unclean. If the bright spot is on the white in the skin of the body, but its appearance is not deeper than the skin, and its hair is not turned white, then the Kohen is to isolate the infected person for 7 days. The Kohen shall examine him on the 7th day, and behold, if he sees the plague is not spread in the skin, then the Kohen is to isolate him for 7 more days. The Kohen is to examine him again on the 7th day, and behold, if the plague is faded and has not spread in the skin, then the Kohen shall pronounce him clean. It is a scab. He is to wash his clothes and be clean. But if the scab spreads on the skin after he has shown himself to the Kohen for his cleansing, he is to show himself to the Kohen once again. The Kohen is to examine him, and if the scab has spread on the skin, the Kohen shall pronounce him unclean. It is Za'aret. When one has a plague of Za'aret, he is to be brought to the Kohen, and the Kohen is to examine him. And behold, if there is a white swelling in the skin, and it has turned the hair white, and if there is raw flesh in the swelling, it is chronic Za'aret in the skin of his flesh, and the Kohen is to pronounce him unclean. He is to isolate him, for he is unclean. Suppose the Za'aret breaks out above the flesh, and so far it all appears in the eyes of the Kohen, covers on the skin of the infected person from his head to his feet. Then the Kohen will see, and behold, if the Za'aret has covered all of his body, he is to pronounce him clean of the plague. Since all has turned white, he is clean. But whenever raw flesh appears upon him, he will be unclean. The Kohen is to examine the raw flesh and pronounce him unclean. The raw flesh is unclean, it is Za'aret. Or if the raw flesh changes and turns white, then he must come to the Kohen. The Kohen is to examine him, and behold, if the plague has turned white, then the Kohen shall pronounce him clean of the plague, he is clean. When the body has a boil on its skin and it was healed, but in the place of the boil there is a white swelling or a bright reddish white spot, then it shall be shown to the Kohen. The Kohen is to examine it, and behold, if its appearance is lower than the skin and its hair is turned white, then the Kohen is to pronounce him unclean. It is a plague of Za'aret, and has broken out within the boil. But if the Kohen examines it and sees there are no white hairs within, and if it is not deeper than the skin but is faded, the Kohen is to isolate him 7 days. If it spreads in the skin, then the Kohen is to pronounce him unclean. It is a plague. But if the bright spot stays in the place and does not spread, it is merely the scar from the boil, the Kohen is to pronounce him clean. Or suppose the body has a burn from fire on its skin, and the raw flesh of the burn becomes a bright spot, reddish white or white. Then the Kohen is to examine it, and behold, if the hair of the bright spot is turned white, and its appearance is deeper than the skin, it is Za'aret. It has broken out in the burning, and the Kohen is to pronounce him unclean. It is the plague of Za'aret. But if the Kohen examines it and sees there is no white hair in the bright spot, and it is not lower than the skin but is faded, then the Kohen is to isolate him 7 days. The Kohen is to examine him on the 7th day. If it is spread in the skin, the Kohen is to pronounce him unclean. It is the plague of Za'aret. The bright spot stays in its place and has not spread in the skin, but is faded, it is a swelling from a burn, and the Kohen shall pronounce him clean, for it is merely a scar from the burn. When a man or a woman has a plague on the head or on the chin, then the Kohen is to examine the plague, and behold, if it is the appearance of is deeper than the skin and the hair, and it is yellow and thin, the Kohen is to pronounce him unclean. It is a scab, Za'aret of the head or the chin. If the Kohen examines the plague of the scab, and behold, its appearance is no deeper than the skin, and there is no black hair within, when the Kohen is to isolate the person infected with the scab for 7 days. On the 7th day, the Kohen is to examine the plague, and behold, if the scab is not spread, and there is no yellow hair in it, and the appearance of the scab is no deeper than the skin, then he shall be shaved. But if he is not to shave the scab, the Kohen is to isolate the one who has the scab for 7 more days. On the 7th day, the Kohen is to examine the scab, and behold, if the scab has not spread in the skin, and its appearance is no deeper than the skin, then the Kohen shall pronounce him clean. He is to wash his clothes and be clean. But if the scab spreads in the skin after his cleansing, then the Kohen is to examine him. And behold, if the scab is spread in the skin, the Kohen may not look for yellow hair. He is unclean. But if he sees the scab is stopped, and black hair has grown in it, the scab is healed, and he is clean. The Kohen shall pronounce him clean. Suppose a man or a woman has bright spots on the skin of the body, bright white spots, then the Kohen is to examine them, and behold, if the white spots on the skin of their body are a dull white, it is harmless rash broken out on the skin, he is clean. baldness is clean. If a man's hair is fallen from his head, he is bald, he is clean. Or if the borders of his face become bald, his forehead is bald, he is clean. But if the bald head or bald forehead, there is a reddish white plague, it is the aret breaking out in the bald head or bald forehead, then the Kohen is to examine him. And behold, if the rising of the plague is reddish white on his bald head or bald forehead, like the appearance of za'aret in the skin or the flesh, he is a man with za'aret. He is unclean. The Kohen shall definitely pronounce him unclean. His plague mark is on his head. Unclean, unclean. The one with za'aret who has the plague mark shall wear torn clothes. The hair of his head is to hang loose. He is to cover his upper lip and cry, unclean, unclean, all the days during which the plague is on him, and he will be unclean. He is unclean. He is to dwell alone outside of the camp will be his dwelling. Also, within a garment has a mark of za'aret on it, whether it is a wooden or a linen garment, whether it is woven or textured, linen or wool, leather or anything made from leather, or if the mark is greenish or reddish within the garment or in the leather, or in the weaving or in the texture, or in anything made from leather, it is the plague of za'aret, and it shall be shown to the Kohen. The Kohen is to examine the plague and isolate it for 7 days. Then he is to re-examine the plague on the 7th day. If the plague is spread in the garment, either in the weaving, the texture, or the leather, whatever the use for the leather may be, the plague is a destructive mildew, it is unclean. He is to burn the garment, or the weaving, or the texture, or wool or linen, or anything of leather in which the plague resides, for it is a destructive mildew. It is to be burned in the fire. If the Kohen examines it, and behold, the plague is not spread in the garment, either in the weaving, the texture, or in anything made of leather, the Kohen shall command that they wash the thing which has the mark, and he is to isolate it more for 7 days. Then the Kohen is to re-examine it after the mark has been washed, and behold, if the mark has not changed its color and is not spread, it is unclean. You are to burn it in the fire, whether the rot is inside or outside. If the Kohen looks and sees the mark is faded after it has been washed, then he is to tear it out of the garment, or the leather, or the weaving, or texture. But if it appears again in the garment, either in the weaving, the texture, or in anything made of leather, it is spreading. You are to burn with fire whatever has the mark, the garment, or weaving, or texture, or whatever item is that you have washed. If the mark has departed from it, it is to be washed a second time and will become clean. This is the Torah for a mark of za'aret in the garment of wool or linen, either in the weaving, the texture, or in anything of leather, to pronounce it clean, or to pronounce it unclean. Chapter 14, Purification of one with za'aret. Then Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, This is the Torah of the one with za'aret in that day of his cleansing. He shall be brought to the Kohen, and the Kohen is to go to the outside of the camp. The Kohen is to examine him, and behold, if the mark of za'aret is healed in one with za'aret, then the Kohen is to command that 2 clean living birds, cedar wood, scarlet, and hyssop, shall be brought to one being cleansed. The Kohen shall command them to kill one of the birds in a clay pot over the living water. As for the living bird, he is to take it, the cedar wood, the scarlet, and the hyssop, and dip them with the living bird to the blood of the bird that was killed over the living water. He is to sprinkle on the one being cleansed from the za'aret 7 times, and pronounce him clean, then release the living bird over the open field. The one to be cleansed must wash his clothes, shave off all his hair, and bathe himself in water. Then he shall be clean. After that he may come into the camp, but is to dwell outside of his tent for 7 days. Then on the 7th day he is to shave all of his hair from his head, his beard, and his eyebrows. He must shave off all of his hair. He is to wash his clothes and bathe his body in water. And then he will be clean. On the 8th day he is to take 2 male lambs without blemish, a 1-year-old ewe lamb without blemish, 3/10 of a pint of fine flour as a grain offering mingled with oil, and a pint of oil. The Kohen who cleanses him is to set the man who is to be cleansed along with those items before Adonai at the entrance of the tent of meeting. The Kohen shall then take one of the male lambs and offer it for a trespass offering with a print of oil, and wave them as a wave offering before Adonai. Then he is to slaughter the male lamb in the place where they slaughter the sin offering and the burnt offering in the sanctuary area. For the sin offering, like the trespass offering, belongs to the Kohen. It is most holy. Then the Kohen is to take some of the blood of the trespass offering and dab it on the tip of the right ear of the one being cleansed, on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot. The Kohen shall then take some of the pint of oil and pour it on the palm of his own left hand. He is to dip his right finger in the oil that is in his left hand and sprinkle some of the oil with his finger 7 times before Adonai. Then the Kohen shall dab some of the rest of that oil that is in his hand on the tip of his right ear, and on the one being cleansed, on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot, on top of the blood of the trespass offering. From what remains of the oil that is in the hand, the Kohen is to dab on the head of the one being cleansed, in the way the Kohen will make atonement for him before Adonai. The Kohen shall offer the sin offering and make atonement for the one being cleansed because of his uncleanness. Afterward, he is to slaughter the burnt offering. Then the Kohen is to present the burnt offering along with the grain offering on the altar, so the Kohen shall make atonement for him, and he will be clean. If he is poor and cannot afford so much, then he shall take 1 male lamb for a trespass offering to be waved, to make atonement for him, plus 1/10 of an ephah of fine flour mingled with oil for a grain offering, a pint of oil, 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, such as he is able to afford. The one shall be a sin offering, and the other a burnt offering. On the 8th day he is to bring them to the Kohen for his cleansing at the entrance of the tent of meeting before Adonai. The Kohen is to take the lamb of the trespass offering and the pint of oil and wave them for a wave offering before Adonai. He is to slaughter the lamb of the trespass offering. The Kohen is to take some of the blood of the trespass offering and dab it on the tip of the right ear of the one being cleansed, on the right thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot. The Kohen shall then pour some of the oil into the palm of his own left hand. He is to sprinkle with his right finger some of the oil that is left in his hand 7 times before Adonai. Then the Kohen is to dab some of the oil that is in his hand on the tip of the right ear of the one being deceased, also on the thumb of his right hand and the big toe of his right foot, on top of that place of blood of the trespass offering. The rest of the oil that is in the hand of the Kohen is to dab on the head of the one being cleansed, to make atonement for him before Adonai. He is to offer 1 of the turtle doves or young pigeons from what his hand can afford, the one for a sin offering, the other for a burnt offering with grain offering. The Kohen shall make atonement for him, being cleansed before Adonai. This is the Torah for one on who is the mark of the Za'aret, who is not able to afford the sacrifice for his cleansing. Purification of a house. Adonai spoke to Moses and to Aaron, saying, Suppose you have come into the land of Canaan, which I give to you for a possession, and I put a mark of Za'aret in a house in the land you possess. Then the one who owns the house shall come and tell the Kohen, saying, Something like a mark has appeared in my house. The Kohen is to order the house emptied before he goes in to examine the mark, so that nothing in the house might be made unclean. Then afterward the Kohen is to enter and inspect the house. He is to examine the mark, and behold, if the mark in the walls of the house with hollow streaks, greenish or reddish, and appears deeper than the wall, then the Kohen is to go out of the house to the door and close up the house for 7 days. Then the Kohen is to come again on the 7th day, and behold, if the mark is spread in the walls of the house, then the Kohen is to command that they take out the stones which are marked and throw them into an unclean place outside of the city. He shall also have the inside of the house scraped all throughout, and they are to dump the mortar that they scraped off the outside of the city into an unclean place. They may then take other stones and put them in the place of those stones. Likewise, he can take other mortar and plaster the house. But suppose the contamination returns, breaking out in the house, after he has pulled out the stones and after he has scraped the house, and it has to be replastered. And then the Kohen is going to go examine. Behold, if the plague has spread within the house, it is a destructive mildew inside, it is unclean. He is to break down the house, its stones, its timber, along with all the house's mortar, and carry them out of the city into an unclean place. Moreover, whoever goes into the house while it is shut up will be unclean until the evening. The one who lies down in the house must wash his clothes, and he who eats in the house must wash his clothes too. But if the Kohen comes in, inspects it, and behold, the plague is not spread within the house after it was replastered, then he shall pronounce the house clean, because the contamination is healed. In order to cleanse the house, he is to take 2 birds, cedar wood, scarlet, and hyssop. He is to kill one of the birds in a clay pot over living water. Then he is to take the cedar wood, the hyssop, the scarlet, and the living bird, and dip them into the blood of the slain bird, as well as the living water, and sprinkle the house 7 times. He shall cleanse the house with blood of the bird, with the living water, with the living bird, the cedar wood, the hyssop, and the scarlet. But he is to let the living bird go out of the city into the open field. So he is to make atonement for the house, and it will be clean. This is the Torah for any kind of mark of Za'aret, even for a scab, or the Za'aret in a garment, or for a house, or for swelling, a scab, or a bright spot, to teach when it is unclean and when it is clean. This is the Torah of Za'aret. Chapter 15. Purification from discharges. Adonai spoke to Moses and to Aaron, saying, Speak to Bnei Israel and tell them, when any man has a fluid discharge from his body, because of his discharge he is unclean. This is to be his uncleanness and his discharge, whether his body flows with his discharge or his body obstructs his discharge. It is his uncleanness. Every bed on which he who has the discharge lies will become unclean, and everything he sits on will be unclean. Whoever touches his bed is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water and be unclean until the evening. Whoever sits on anything on which the man who has the discharge sat is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water and be unclean until the evening. Whoever touches the body of the one who has the discharge is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water and be unclean until evening. Or if the one who has the discharge spits on someone who is clean, and he is also to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water and be unclean until the evening. Any saddle the one who has the discharge rides on will be unclean. Whoever touches anything that was under him will be unclean until the evening. Whoever carries them is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water and to be unclean until the evening. Also, anyone the person with the discharge touches without rinsing his hands in water shall wash his clothes and bathe himself in water and be unclean until the evening. A clay pot, that one with the discharge touches shall be broken, and every wooden vessel shall be rinsed in water. When the one who has a fluid discharge is cleansed of his issue, then he is to count for himself 7 days for the purification and wash his clothes. Then he is to bathe his body in running water, and he will be clean. On the 8th day he is to take 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons and come before Adonai at the entrance of the tent of meeting and give them to the Kohen. The Kohen is to offer them, one for a sin offering and the other for a burnt offering. So the Kohen shall make atonement for him before Adonai for his fluid discharge. If any man has an emission of semen, then he is to bathe his whole body in water and be unclean until evening. Every garment and all leather with semen on it are to be washed with water, and it will be unclean until the evening. If a man lies with a woman and there is an emission of semen, they shall both bathe themselves in water and be unclean until the evening. If a woman has a discharge, and her discharge from her body is blood, she shall be in her nidah 7 days, and whoever touches her will be unclean until evening. Everything that she lies on in her nidah will become unclean. Also everything that she sits on will become unclean. Whoever touches her bed is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water and be unclean until evening. Whoever touches anything that she sits on is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water and be unclean until the evening. If it is on the bed or on anything where she sits, where he touches it, he will be unclean until the evening. If any man lies with her so that her nidah gets on him, he will be unclean for 7 days, and every bed where he lies will be unclean. Now, if a woman has a discharge of her blood for many days, not during her nidah, and if she is discharged beyond the time of her nidah, all the days of the discharge of her uncleanness shall be in the days of her nidah. She is unclean. Every bed where she lies all the days of her discharge will be like her bed during her nidah, and everything she sits on will become unclean, like the uncleanness of her nidah. Whoever touches these things will become unclean, and is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water and be unclean until the evening. If she is cleansed of her discharge, then she is to count off 7 days for herself, and after that she will be clean. On the 8th day she is to take 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons and bring them to the Kohen at the entrance of the tent of meeting. The Kohen is to offer, one for a sin offering and the other for a burnt offering. So the Kohen will make atonement for her before Adonai for the uncleanness of her discharge. So you are to keep Bnei Israel separate from their uncleanness, so they will not die in their uncleanness by defiling my tabernacle that is in their midst. This is the one Torah for the one who has discharge, for the one who has an emission of semen, which causes him to become unclean, as well as for her who has a period of nidah, and for the man or woman who has a discharge, or the one who lies with her, who is unclean. Parashat Akaremat, Leviticus 16. Then Adonai spoke to Moses after the death of the 2 sons of Aaron, when they approached the presence of Adonai and died. Adonai said to Moses, "Tell Aaron and your brother not to come at just any time into the holiest place behind the curtain, before the atonement cover which is on the ark, so that he would not die. For I will be appearing in the cloud over the atonement cover." Yom Kippur service. In this way, Aaron shall come into the sanctuary with a young bull for a sin offering and a ram for a burnt offering. He is to put the holy linen garment on the holy linen garment, have the linen undergarments on his body, and put on the linen sash, and wear the linen turban. They are the holy garments, and he shall bathe his body in water and put them on. Then he is to take from the congregation of Bnei Israel 2 he-goats for a sin offering and 1 ram for a burnt offering. Then Aaron is to offer the bull for the sin offering, which is for himself, and make atonement for himself in his house. And then he is to take the 2 goats and present them before Adonai at the entrance of the tent of meeting. Aaron will then cast lots for the 2 goats, 1 lot for Adonai and the other lot for the scapegoat. Aaron is to present the goat on which the lot for Adonai fell and make it a sin offering. But the goat upon which the lot for the scapegoat fell is to be presented alive before Adonai to make atonement upon it, by sending it away as a scapegoat into the wilderness. Also Aaron is to present the bull of the sin offering, for which is for himself, and so to make atonement for himself in his house, he is to slaughter the bull of the sin offering, which is for himself. He is to take a fire pan full of coals of fire from off the altar and before Adonai, plus 2 handfuls of sweet powdered incense, and bring it within the curtain. Then he is to put the incense on the fire before Adonai, so that the cloud of incense may cover the atonement cover that is on the ark, so that he would not die. He is then to take some of the blood of the bull and sprinkle it on his finger on the atonement cover on the east side. Before the atonement cover, he is to sprinkle some of the blood with his finger 7 times. Then he is to slaughter the goat for the sin offering, which is for the people, bring its blood behind the curtain, and do with it as he did with the blood of the bull. Sprinkle it on the atonement cover and before the atonement cover. So he is to make atonement for the holy place because of the uncleanness of Bnei Israel, and because of their transgressions of all their sins. He is to do the same for the tent of meeting, which dwells with them in the midst of their impurities. No one is to be in the tent of meeting when he enters to make atonement in the holy place until he comes out and has made atonement for himself and for his household and for all the assembly of Israel. Then he is to go out to the altar that is before Adonai and make atonement for it. He has to take some of the bull's blood and some of the goat's blood and dab it around on the horns of the altar. He is to sprinkle some blood on it with his finger 7 times and cleanse it and consecrate it from the uncleanness of Bnei Israel. When he has finished atoning for the holy place, the tent of meeting, and the altar, that he is to present the live goat. Aaron shall lay both his hands on the head of the live goat and confess over all the iniquities of Bnei Israel and all their transgressions and all their sins. He shall place them on the head of the goat and send it away into the wilderness by the land of a man who is in readiness. The goat will carry all their iniquities by itself into a solitary land, and he is to leave the goat in the wilderness. Then Aaron is to come into the tent of meeting, take off the linen garments that he put on when he went to the holy place, and leave them there. He is to bathe himself with water in a holy place, to put on the garments, and come out to offer his burnt offerings and the burnt offering of the people, to make atonement for himself and for the people. Then he is to burn up fat of the sin offering and smoke on the altar. The man who leaves the goat as a scapegoat is to wash his clothes and bathe his body in water. Afterwards he may come out into the camp. The bull for the sin offering and the goat for the sin offering, whose blood was brought into the make atonement in the holy place, shall be carried outside the camp, and their hides, their flesh, and their dung burned with fire. The one who burns them is to wash his clothes and bathe his body in water. Then afterwards he may come into the camp. It is to be a statute to you forever that in the 7th month, on the 10th day of the month, you are to afflict your souls and do no kind of work, both the native born and the outside dwelling among you. For on this day atonement will be made for you to cleanse you. From all your sins you will be clean before Adonai. It is a Shabbat of solemn rest to you, and you are to afflict your souls. It is a statute forever. The Kohen who is anointed and who is consecrated to be Kohen in his father's place will make the atonement and put on the linen garments, the holy garments. He is to make atonement for the holy sanctuary, for the tent of meeting, for the altar, for the Kohanim, and for all the people of the assembly. This will be an everlasting statute for you, to make atonement for Bnei Israel once in the year, because of all their sins. It was done as Adonai commanded Moses. Leviticus 17, sacrifice of life and blood. Then Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to Aaron, to his sons, and to all Bnei Israel, and say to them, This is the word which Adonai has commanded. Anyone from the house of Israel who slaughters a bull, a lamb, or a goat in the camp or outside the camp, but has not brought it to the entrance of the tent of meeting to offer it as a sacrifice to Adonai before the tabernacle, let blood guilt be charged to that man. He has shed blood. That man is to be cut off from among his people. Thus Bnei Israel may bring their sacrifices that they were making in the open field to Adonai at the entrance of the tent of meeting to the Kohen, and offer them as sacrifices of fellowship offerings to Adonai. The Kohen is to sprinkle the blood on the altar of Adonai at the entrance of the tent of meeting and burn up the fat as smoke for a soothing aroma to Adonai. They are no longer to offer their sacrifices to the goat demons, after which they play the prostitute. This will be a statute forever to them throughout their generations. And then you are to say to them, Anyone from the house of Israel or from outsiders dwelling among them who offers a burnt offering or sacrifice but does not bring it to the entrance of the tent of meeting to sacrifice it to Adonai is to be cut off from his people. Anyone from the house of Israel, from the outsider dwelling among them, who eats any kind of blood, I will set my face against that soul, the one who eats his blood, and will cut him off from among the people. For the life of the creature is in the blood, and I have given it to you on the altar to make atonement for your lives. For it is the blood that makes the atonement because of the life. Therefore I have said to Bnei Israel, no person among you may eat blood, nor may any outsider dwelling among you eat blood. Any person from Bnei Israel or from outsiders dwelling among you who hunts his game and game any animal or bird that may be eaten, but strain its blood and cover it with dust. For the life of every creature, its blood is its life. Therefore I said to Benaiah yesterday, I'll order to not to eat blood of any kind of creature. For the life of every creature is its blood. Whoever eats it is to be cut off. Everyone who eats what dies naturally or is torn by animals, whether he is native born or a foreigner, is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water. He will be unclean until the evening, then he will be clean. But if he does not wash them or bathe his body, then he will bear his iniquity.